The Wheel of Time has just finished its first season on Amazon Prime. It's a new high fantasy show, an adaptation of a long series of books written by Robert Jordan, and then, or at least started by Robert Jordan, and then finished towards the end by his friend and fellow author Brandon Sanderson after Jordan died, leaving his final manuscript unfinished. Apparently, the series has like 14 different books, and some of them are around 1,000 pages long. So it doesn't seem like something easy to get through. And I will admit straight up that I've never read any of them, so I approached the show with fresh eyes. And what drew me to it mostly were the hopeful comparisons that this would become Amazon's new Game of Thrones or Amazon's new Lord of the Rings. Well, it most certainly hasn't, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we? The story is spread over 8 episodes and takes place in a fantasy world, although we do get some slight hints that this may be actually a fantasy setting that comes after a futuristic world collapses, fitting in with the idea of time as a wheel that repeats itself. Apparently 3,000 years before the events of the show, the world was destroyed by a powerful man called the Dragon, who stood in opposition to the Dark One, nearly destroying him and putting him in eternal imprisonment. Now the influence and power of Dark One is beginning to grow again, and there is a risk that he will break out of his eternal prison. And this lady wizard named Moiraine goes off across the world to search for a new incarnation of the dragon, which is supposed to appear as a dragon reborn according to a prophecy. She wants to guide that person to the Dark One's prison to help strengthen it. But of course there is always this risk that they would fall over to the dark side. Moiraine ends up at a rural village where she meets not one but 5 potential candidates, 5 young people who could all be the dragon. Some of them exhibit magical powers, they all seem connected by fate, and in the face of the Dark Forces' attack on the village, Moiraine just takes all of them on this quest across the world. So, if it sounds similar to Lord of the Rings, think again, because it is not similar. It is straight up derivative of it. Defeated Dark Lord coming back to power, a group of young people going on a quest with a wizard to defeat them, team being split up at one point in time, a noble warrior who happens to also be an heir to a lost kingdom, a mighty city defending the borders of the Dark One's lands, a dangerous fallen city through which the heroes need to get through as a shortcut. I mean, literally every single one of the major plot points and character archetypes in here you could point to and find the correlating ones in the Lord of the Rings. It feels very, very, very generic as a result, because of course Lord of the Rings served as an inspiration to many other works of fantasy, but doing it so blatantly, just copying things straight up, it doesn't feel good. Now, I was told on the internet that this was kind of intended, that the books do start as Discount Lord of the Rings and then grow into something else entirely. So I was kind of willing to accept that and go through the first unoriginal season if it promises better things in the future. But the question, of course, is, at this point in time, does the show offer anything else that's worth the time investment? Is it any good in the meantime, as we're getting to the supposedly good stuff? Well, the disappointing answer for me is that it isn't. First of all, the most obvious problem, which was very well put into words by some random commenter on the web, and which I will quote, is that the show looks simultaneously very expensive and very cheap. Like, the wide shots of nature and mountains and forests, they look amazing, the costumes are pretty good, special effects are alright, even if I didn't like the boring looking magic. The camera work, the sound design, locations, you can see through it that a lot of money and a lot of effort was actually put into the show. And yet at the same time, there is something about it that makes it look very cheap as well, like a student production. Maybe it's the fact that despite being very well designed, the world always looks far too clean. Everybody has perfect makeup, the clothes look like they were just made, even after weeks of travels, the characters look like they just took a shower. Maybe it's because of the poor performances by pretty much all actors in the show, but primarily the young cast. And maybe it's something else, and maybe it's a combination. I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm sure if you just watch 15 minutes of any episodes, you'll know what I'm talking about. Secondly, I've mentioned the performances. I mean, yikes. The acting is not good. I mean, the young actors are trying hard, but they're not really given a lot to work with, and as such, their performances come off very flat. And this is in part connected to a bigger problem, which is the pacing. See, the showrunners adapted a very long book into just 8 episodes, and the show seems to really try to rush through the relevant plot points, one after another. Okay, we need to get here, and this needs to happen, and this character does this, and just to manage to cover all of the relevant events in the very limited time. And the result is that by focusing on the events, on like doing the checklist of the things that needs to happen, we actually get to spend very little time getting to know and developing the characters. Their personalities end up not being very distinct from one another, and at the end I really couldn't tell you anything about any of them. The development of characters and relationships between them is nearly non-existent. And this leads to another problem, which is that I struggled to care about anything or anyone. When characters were getting hurt or even killed, I would always just go, alright, cool, I guess. Should I have any emotional reaction to these supposedly big moments? I mean, perhaps, but the show does not elicit one, like, ever. So, yesterday I saw the final episode and it ended, and I just went, is that it? Well, okay, just time to move on with my life, I guess. I mean, I was completely indifferent to the ending. It didn't do anything to me, and that same thing extends to the entire show. And here's the thing, I don't think it's entirely terrible. Like, there are things which I found enjoyable, some elements of world building, the seemingly grander story looming in the distance, some of the action scenes. Hell, there are even some slower dialogue moments which I thought were okay. But in the end, there was just zero emotional investment in any of the characters or events, which I think the show fails at spectacularly because of its rushed pacing, which in turn is a result of way too few episodes for the amount of story. I will also say that a lot of the book fans on the internet, I saw them, having problems with the adaptation, with significant changes being made to the nature of the story and the characters. Again, I have not read the books, so I can't comment personally how much weight there is to those comments. But just recently, I was in the other boat because I was watching The Witcher's second season, and I'm a fan of the books, and that season really trampled on the source material. So I can kind of relate to this disappointment, and perhaps there is something to it. In any case, for me, as the show, as just the show, was painfully mediocre, and I really don't know if I'll be tuning in for the next season, because what I've seen so far has just been generic, derivative, and not particularly engaging.